So, in our last episode, we talked about primary orientation, a primary orientation of compassionate connection rather than criticism, constriction, and closure. Today, we're going to continue to expand on that. And all of this first week is a work in self compassion. The idea, of course, again, is that we cannot do interpersonally what we're not able to do intrapersonally. So we're working on all of this ourselves. The great news is that even if you don't have a partner to practice compassionate communication with right away, you definitely have yourself. And so the practice of self-compassion is actually, it's a way to practice these same principles that we're going to use interpersonally, but practicing them intrapersonally and really setting that template, how we're oriented, how we're coming at life, how we're coming at our emotional experiences. Then what you'll find is that when, let's say, you've got a spouse or a partner, and when they come with a challenge, if you've been practicing relating to yourself from the spirit of openness, it's going to be much more likely that you relate to them, that when they, oh, I got this challenge, that instead of going to fix it, or instead of going to shoulding, or gosh forbid, going to shaming, your first tendency will be to go to connection. And then once you've established that baseline of connection, then everything's possible. Giving each other advice is possible, making positive change is possible, all of that's possible. But first, establishing that baseline of connection. The same thing is true in our inner work. There's a lot of material you could find out there that said, that has this implication that how you do inner work, how you get yourself to grow, is that you sort of dislike yourself enough and you push yourself to grow, because where you are, that's not the paradigm that we're doing here. We're doing a paradigm that says the best way to encourage growth is to love yourself. And this is true, we can see in the brain development of young children, the emotional development of young children. If we want them to grow, the best thing to do is to create secure attachment for them, to create this sense that they feel felt, that whatever's going on, they don't lose that fundamental connection, that compassionate connection that underlies everything else. And then the cool thing lately, the research on secure attachment, is that parents can then mess up a lot of other stuff. But if they have that baseline that the child feels attended to, it tends to, there's a lot of room for forgiveness for that other stuff with this baseline of secure attachment. So this is really great news. It's great news to a lot of parents, because parents often wonder if they're doing anything right. Well, good news. There's a lot of wiggle room if you just get that primary orientation. And the same thing is going to happen within us when we try to change from the places I hate about myself, when we try to constrict away to make the change happen. That change is often short-lived. We burn out on that. It's hard to get a sustainable momentum going to fuel that change. But when we come from this compassionate and connected orientation, we can actually love ourselves into greater growth. And once we get used to that in ourselves, we're going to apply it to those around us, and we're going to love them into greater growth too. Won't that be a wonderful thing? So, getting into this orientation today, the trick we're going to use, and I borrowed this from Kristen Neff's great book, Self-Compassion. So I highly recommend, if you want some reading outside of this course, read Kristen Neff's book, Self-Compassion. You'll hear some of the things that she says mirrored in what I say. There's a lot of great evidence I've drawn. She's one of my best sources for the last couple of years, because there's just a lot of great research there. So this trick, this exercise is called the wise friend, the wise friend. And what you're going to do, again, it's a contemplation exercise. So if you imagine, oh yeah, this is coffee meditation, by the way. If you imagine that you were having a really hard time in your life and you had a trustworthy, wise, compassionate friend that you could go to, how they would be. So perhaps as just a thought experiment, and we'll do a little bit more in our formal kind of meditation vibe in a minute, but just as a thought experiment, think of a problem that you have in your life, something that's really troubling you. It could be an inner problem. Oh, I just can't seem to grow out of this pattern. It could be a relational problem. It could be a problem with the world. It could be a health challenge, whatever it is. imagine if you went, and if you don't have anybody in this life right now, that's fine. We're going to imagine the idealized archetype of the wise and compassionate friend. And you went to them and you wanted some support, you wanted some care, and you told them all, oh, here's my problem. How would you want them to respond? What would be the kindest, most nourishing way for them to respond? So just take a moment, we'll contemplate that. You had this wise, wise friend. You brought, oh, here's my issue. And how would you want them to respond? So for a lot of us, we would want first to be heard, right? We know the opposite. Okay, let's do it just a minute for contrast. But we know the opposite of you start to tell them your story and then they already butt in. And we're like, wow, you didn't really hear me. Or you tell them your story and they reflect back something else, something other. And it's like, wow, were you even listening? So we want to really be heard first. And then usually if our friend does give us advice or give us reassurance, we know that they're not just doing that without first empathizing with us. They're not doing it as a judgment. I've had friends who pretended to be wise, and in their probably very well meaning, they just gave advice as if what I was going through was wrong. So that's not often very comforting. But if you've ever had a person like this, or you can imagine a person like this, maybe it's your dog, you're having a hard time. And what is healing is the power of their presence. They give you that unconditional positive regard. Like whatever you bring, it doesn't ruffle them. They'll stand in their values, but they can totally accept you just the way you are. So this is a little exercise we're going to use today of that we bring about this imagery, this imagination of this wise friend, the wise and compassionate, caring being. So however that works for you, maybe it is your dog or your cat. They're always there for you. They don't have any agenda of their own, unconditional love, whatever. For some people, this is spiritual. It's their relationship with their deity, with their religious figure. No problem, whatever it is that works for you. But what we're going to do is if it was challenging at all to develop that unconditional positive regard, like we did yesterday, just sort of fresh, then this is a trick in the mind to get ourselves into it. Okay, what would it be like if I had this wise friend and I could bring my issues to them? And so the wise friend is a non-critical partner, right? They're a non-critical influence, they're a compassionate influence, they're a present influence. These, I think, are kind of the basics, right? They're not spaced out, they're totally present, they're actually attending to you, they're attending to you with love. And then they don't have an agenda. They're not going to shame you. They're not going to try to change you. They actually are committed to your growth, your well-being, and your thriving. This is your wise friend. So maybe there's somebody like that in your life. You can call them to mind. Maybe you're just creating an imagination of that, but that's what we're going to use for our meditation this morning and then for our mindset practice for the day. So let's combine it with our hand on heart mudra or whatever hand position. So you tried this one yesterday, whatever hand position works for you. So some days just putting my hands down on my thighs is very grounding with that palm down position. Other people might like their palms up, like they're in this gesture of openness or receiving. Whatever works for you. This is the one I'm recommending for at least this first week of this course, just because it's research-based and I've had really good results as well. So get comfortable. Close your eyes if you want to, leave them open if you want to. Take a couple of deep breaths, let it out with a sense of a sigh. You can sigh audibly or just have that sense of letting go with the exhales. And then call to mind this imagery or memory or imagination of the wise friend. They're present, they're compassionate, they don't have any agenda except your thriving and your well-being. They're present, they're compassionate, they have no agenda except your thriving and your well-being. And then, just like we did before, do a little check in, your body, your mind, your emotions. How are you? And imagine that you can just bring up, maybe if there's something very positive, you bring that to this wise friend, and you just imagine how the wise friend would react with their presence, their compassion, and their agenda for your well-being. And also perhaps think into any challenges that might be alive for you, physical, mental, emotional. And imagine that you brought those to your wise friend. And how would they respond? Think of them responding from that sense of presence, compassion, and no agenda except for your well-being and thriving. And then note in your body, if you're able to really imagine that being met with that type of presence, what feelings does that bring up for you? Like for me, I have a sense of openness in your heart, in my heart. So notice if you were met with that sense of presence, compassion, no agenda, just this total, just wise and friendly energy, what feelings come up in you? We're just going to take the last minute of our meditation just to savor those enjoyable feelings. So whatever feelings, like, so for me, I have this sense of expansion and opening of my heart, and I'm just going to breathe into that, enjoy that sense of expansion and opening. And I have the sense that this sort of nourishes my own capacity to be open in that sense of compassionate connection. Okay, then when you're ready, if your eyes were closed, you can very slowly and gradually come back to having them open. And finishing up for today. So, your practice, the wise friend. This is our mindset practice today. And as you go throughout the day, the idea is if any distressing thing, particularly distress, you can use this for positive experiences, of course. A lot of us don't have as much of a challenging time with enjoyable experiences, but like we said yesterday, they are definitely a opportunity for empathy, for compassionate connection. But particularly when difficulty comes up, when we feel anxious, when we feel self-judgmental, whatever, imagine, just call to mind this sense of the wise friend. It could be your higher self, however you like to think of it. And how would they respond? Someone who was present. So they're not spaced out, they're attentive, they're understanding the situation, they're compassionate, they've got an open-hearted orientation, and they just want you to grow. They just want you to grow. So it's this beautiful thing of like, oh no, this thing happened at work. I'm really worried. And there's this sense that like, okay, well, whatever that is, I love you and I want you to grow. And we start to develop this underlying sense of feeling loved. And eventually we're going to turn this right into self-love. But for the moment, we're externalizing that. If you have a real life embodied person who knows how to do this, well, congratulations and call them up. But throughout the rest of the day, to the best of your ability, we create this inner wise friend. Any challenges, any time that you remember, just call that to mind and bathe yourself, bask in that sense of presence, compassion, and no agenda to criticize, to change you, to shame you, to fix you, none of that. Just the agenda to see you as your fullest, happiest, wholest self. All right, empathy first. And today we're practicing that through cultivating the wise friend.